and thank you for joining me here today. Today I'm going to talk about a couple of issues that have come up recently in the news around the world, not necessarily UK based, but I just thought I'd chat through a couple of things and give you my thoughts on these in a kind of serious Sunday kind of way, and just to talk about my views on certain issues. The first one I wanted to cover off, and I'm going to try and go through these relatively quickly. The first one I wanted to cover off is the issues recently around Caster Sememya. Now, I recorded something when I was up in Leeds, and unfortunately it didn't come out well. The audio wasn't very good, so I thought I'd cover this again now in this video. Caster Sememya is a South African-born runner. She's a world-beating Olympic athlete who is born female but has a, let's say, a genetic condition that means that she has a much higher testosterone level. A testosterone level that in what you would consider to be a regular athlete would be synonymous with drug taking, and therefore is something that has been a focus of a lot of criticism. She has been accused in the past of perhaps being male. Some suggest that maybe she is actually male and that's how she's so good, how she's so strong. And the judgment that was handed down recently is that she will have to take medication to lower her testosterone levels if she wishes to continue to compete. Now, you won't be surprised to find that I think that's ridiculous. I think it's ludicrous and I think it's a terrible decision. But I think I wanted to just take a little bit of a time to talk about the reason why this is, and to look at whether this is a trans-related thing, whether it's a gender-related thing, or is this a a thing that's kind of unique to athletics, and there's a reason why potentially it's unique to athletics. So, I don't necessarily think that this is a case of discrimination against a trans person. I think certainly not by design. I think it is discrimination in its outcome, and I think that the way that this is actually happening is discriminatory. I don't think you can really do much to argue against that. This is a person who is born a certain way, and they're being told you have to address that, you have to change that in order to make yourself more like other people. This is like, and I know I'm being spurious here, I know this is a bit flippant, but it's like saying to a very, very tall basketball player, you must cut your feet off because you're too tall. The too tall players game is not fair on the other people. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. We're talking about someone who is too naturally gifted to be allowed to compete. Now, I can't think of many or if any examples of that being the case in any other environment in the world. Certainly not in men's sport. There's no way in men's sport that someone would be born with a condition that we would consider them to be too gifted to compete. You have swimmers with their very sort of short legs and elongated bodies, so like a Michael Phelps. His physical makeup makes him more competitive at swimming than other people are. That is just a fact. It's a similar thing with Ian Thorpe, for example, the Australian swimmer. You have something like the sort of, if you want to look at the physique of certain athletes, people who have very long legs, like a Usain Bolt with his sprinting ability. You, for the most part, would look at athletes and say, you're lucky, you've got some natural gift, you've worked hard, you've trained hard, and now you're in this position. One thing I don't think you could argue with is that Caster Semenya has trained incredibly hard to get to where she is. You could be her, and you could have been in a completely different situation and never got into athletics, and you would never know or have any of these controversies whatsoever. But someone recognized a gift in her. Someone recognized, I would guess, some form of skill. She was doing this probably in school. I don't know her exact biography, but then recognized that she had a gift, and that was something that she should look to use and leverage, and then had to work incredibly hard to be able to actually fulfill that gift and get to be the top runner in the world. She hasn't coasted there. She hasn't got off the couch like me, getting off the couch and just going off for a run and suddenly is besting everyone in the world. She's worked incredibly hard to get here, and to get here and then be told you're too good genetically, you're going to have to do something to change that. I think even on a principle basis, even if she wanted to continue to compete on a principle basis, I wouldn't have any issue if she said, no, that's the wrong thing to do. I should not comply with that based purely on principle. Now, just to tap on one thing I was mentioning earlier, I don't think this is a trans-related issue. I don't think this is something which is necessarily motivated by a trans or gender bigotry. However, I do think that this is entirely related to doping and to drug taking. The reason I would say that is that the levels of testosterone that Caster Semenya has is something that you would be looking for amongst doping athletes, athletes who are testing very high for levels of testosterone, which would suggest they're doing something to try and enhance their performance. In Caster, it's natural. But the reason we're testing for that, the reason we're looking for this, is because of the, let's say, the poor behavior, the cheating behavior of so-called normal athletes. Athletes who don't have this condition. And I think that's an incredible shame. I think that, in this case, Caster Semenya happens to be possessing a characteristic which happens to be right in the spotlight of an industry, of a not an industry, but a field of sport that is absolutely under the spotlight on its ability to police and to correct drug taking. Now, I thought I'd just throw this out here very quickly. So I think this is a terrible decision. I think it's a terrible, terrible ruling, and my heart goes out to Caster Semenya. I hope that whatever she does next, I hope she's happy and fulfilled. And personally, I think this is a mistake. I think this is it's one of those landmark decisions that in future I think we'll look back on and say that was an opportunity to be progressive, and it was an opportunity missed. And I know some people think that progression sometimes goes too far. I can't think of many examples when we look back at times where we've been progressive and we don't think to ourselves, it's a good progression. We don't think there was an opportunity to do it earlier. We could have done this better. We could have done it faster. We could have done it sooner. And I think maybe this was the chance to do something a little bit sooner and just kind of make a case here. Anyway, now on the issue of trans athletes competing, I thought just to touch on that one very, very quickly. I don't have any particular easy answers to the issue of what happened when trans women want to compete with genetic women, for example. What happens in those circumstances? Now, I'm going to propose a solution, and I'm just going to propose this in a couple of minutes, and I'm going to kind of try and tackle what I think is the underlying problem here. Men's sport is vastly higher paid, on the most part, than women's sport. Unless your sport is tennis, and unless you're in an absolute elite level, or maybe golf, for example, unless your sport is actually quite an elitist sport, tennis and golf tend to be quite elitist type sports. If it's football, if it's a sport of the people, that kind of stuff, if it's rugby, you will not be paid anything like as much as a woman to compete professionally in sport as you will if you're a man. The same goes even for sponsorship deals. Sponsorship deals for male athletes are generically much more better paid than sponsorship deals for female athletes. And they contain less clauses about things like taking time off to have kids and stuff like that. It's a generally, sport is generally weighted very heavily in the favour of men. And this is because, as we know, for not too long ago, women were discouraged from actually taking part in sport. And the idea of women being competitive, particularly being professionally competitive at sport, was really quite radical and just wasn't allowed at certain times in the past. We even have people today, like certain Pakistani cricketers, who talk about how they will not let their daughters play outdoor sports. This is a current thing. I think it was Shahid Afridi who said that. It's something that is it's still part of culture today. The idea that perhaps girls shouldn't play sports in some cultures. I think the reason is, or let's say there is a potential way to deal with all of these issues, which is to ban all single-sex sports. Now, how would that work in practice? How do you ban all single-sex sports? Right. You make all sports multi-gender. Okay. Now, I know what everyone's going to say for the most part is most people will say, well, what about boxing? What about UFC, stuff like that? You can't have women fighting against men, etc. Well, you could weight things appropriately Okay, so you could create a weight class of boxing, okay, where you said that women of this weight compete against men of this weight, and because of muscle density, etc., that is an equivalence, and they will fight each other. Having said that, I think that sports where we punch each other and beat each other up ought to be on a relatively limited shelf life, and perhaps shouldn't be something we're particularly focused on trying to find ways to make them more, gender equal. I think maybe we should be trying to find ways of making them less physically damaging, and perhaps of not doing them at all. But if you want to take team sports, if you want to take athletics, for example, my suggestion is this, and everyone's going to love this. Take athletics. There should be one Olympics for men, women, and Paralympians, male and female. And what you do is you say that in the Paralympics, people compete in the same event, but with different levels of grading for their level of disability. So if you're running with only, for example, if you're a sprinter and you have one leg that is not present below the knee, then your ranking, your rating as a Paralympian will be different from someone who has two legs both missing below the knee. And so you can finish a race slower than someone else and still win the race, because according to the handicapping level that you have performed as an individual to a level that is better than someone else performed as an individual. And that's how the Paralympics works. Now, I think we should introduce that for all sports. And I think we should put men and women and Paralympians, everyone competing together, drug takers, non-drug takers, put them all into one race. So you have one 100 meters race, and it's run by men and by women and by Paralympians, and you can have drug taking in there and everything else that you want to be able to do. But basically every athlete is individually graded based on their height, their muscle mass, based on their testosterone level, based on whether they do or do not take drugs, what kind of drug regimen they're on, based on their disabilities, and they are given a sort of, you have your average, you have the positive, people who have advantages and people who have disadvantages. And the person with the top advantages is going to have to perform so well to beat everyone else that their comparative advance of their let's say they're maximizing their own potential has to be better than everyone else is maximizing their own potential. That is how you run athletics in the future. You simply ban all forms of single gender athletics, and you treat natural advantages as just that, and you level the playing field for everyone. This is the most egalitarian suggestion I think you will have ever heard. It will never happen in my lifetime, I don't think. But I think it's the only way to make things fair. You remove the need to to categorize everyone up and split them up into you're this type, you're this type, you're this type. We don't know what to do with you because you're a bit of this and a bit of that and you're confusing us. You put everyone in together and you simply say who is the best at fulfilling their human potential based on their gifts, based on what they've done with themselves as an individual, who has fulfilled their best human potential. And that for me is a far more equal and fair way of running athletics, and that is the solution. That is the solution to all of mankind's issues when it comes to sports and sporting competition. And that would get rid of Caster Sememya's issue. She might argue that she is therefore, she would have to perform better in a race than a female athlete who had a lower level of testosterone. Fine, good, fulfill your potential based on what you are. Now this is quite, this reminds me a little bit of, I was thinking about this, it reminds me of the film Gattaca. And that's kind of what I kind of thought about. There's this film Gattaca, which is the idea that people, when you genetically engineer humans, if you genetically engineer a human that has got all of the weaknesses removed, they're the very best of who they are. They're destined for greatness. The concept of the film is there is no gene for the human spirit. That is the tagline for the film. There's no gene for the human spirit. The point being that you can have all the genetic advantages in the entire world, all the genetic disadvantages in the entire world, but it is your spirit, it is your determination, it's your drive to succeed that ultimately might make the difference between whether you are the best or someone else is the best. And by leveling that genetic playing field, by accounting for genetic advantages, genetic disadvantages, and everything else in between, you can have a race that is inclusive, completely fair, and celebrates the achievement of the spirit, the achievement of the drive and the ambition of the individual, not celebrating the physical advantages of the individual. Now, there are obviously, if you extend that, some massive problems with that as an idea, but assuming we get past race relations and all the other issues that we have in the world, then I'm sure it would work out absolutely fine. Anyway, so that was my thoughts on the issue with regards to Caster Sememya. I'm not joking when I say that I think that's the way things should be. I think it is the way things should be. I think sport would be far more interesting if you put the world's best Paralympian sprinter in a race against Usain Bolt, and you said to Usain Bolt, you have all this advantage. This person, this woman, has these disadvantages. Here's how we're going to equal your scores. Now race. And that way you elevate everything into one competition. In football, you simply arrange a situation where every football team cannot exceed a certain score. That's it. You rank individuals based on their grading. So, for example, a strong male tall athlete might get a higher score than a short, disabled female athlete. Some kind of scoring thing, and you say that no football team can field a total score of more than this. And that way, every team would, you might have some able-bodied, incredibly good, gifted men. You're Lionel Messi. You'll have some Lionel Messis on your team, but you would have to have some people who are less gifted on your team, and you would be forced to accommodate everyone in your sporting endeavours, and that would be completely equal. It would be, I think, inclusive. It would be fun. It would shake everything up, and it would be interesting. There's no reason why this can't be done. Stuff like boxing, I don't care about boxing. Boxing is punching other people in the head. Who cares about boxing? Just get rid of it as a sport altogether, because frankly, I think we ought to be done with that kind of stuff by now. But if you have to, I'm sure there's a way to work it out. Anyway, that's my view on Caster Sememya. I think there's a lot that could be done to improve the situation. The reason I come up with this kind of weird Star Trek type solution is because I really don't think there is today a way to deal with this when you're still living in a binary world. Men's and women's sports, and never shall the two meet. That's the problem today. It's not trans athletes. Trans athletes aren't the problem. It's men's sport and women's sport, and the two cannot possibly meet. They can't overlap. It's too dangerous. It's it's a joke when we talk about people competing, and there's so much money in some areas of men's sports that you couldn't possibly risk all of that on being more inclusive, being more interesting, and giving a sport time to be more fair and inclusive and sharing amongst other people. I think that's something that could be done. It won't be done because money rules, and it's not going to happen. But I think it would be, it's to me, it's the clear solution. It's how they would do it in Star Trek, and therefore it must be the right thing to do. Anyway, thanks for joining me here today. Hope this was of interest to you. If there's any questions, please let me know in the comment section down below. Feel free to like, share and subscribe. Click the little bell to stay notified on upcoming videos, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks for joining me as ever, and bye. Bye.